When it comes to group presentations, the very first thing we need to keep in mind is structure. The biggest mistake we tend to make when it comes to presenting with a bunch of people is that there might be a sense of confusion and chaos. And that's where these things tend to go wrong. But if we can just take some time out to create some structure to make sure that we're delegating work to everyone correctly, we can avoid that confusion. Structure can be broken down into 3 parts. First, ensure that there's a leader or a moderator as part of this presentation. This is important because we need somebody who can be held accountable if things tend to get out of hand. It also helps if there's going to be a Q&A session at the end, which we'll discuss a little more in detail later on in this video. The second thing when it comes to structure is to make sure that we all probably have our strengths or areas of expertise when it comes to this group presentation. Or there might be certain parts that certain people have worked on. So we need to ensure that those people are speaking on their areas of knowledge. It's a very simple and obvious thing when we think about it, but I've been in situations where we haven't had this discussion before and it's just caused confusion. The person who's good at something is not presenting it, and it for no reason causes the quality of the delivery to fall down. And the last thing when it comes to structure is to make sure that we're telling some sort of story. It shouldn't just be that you're moving from person A to person B to person C. There should be a seamless flow because your audience is just looking at you as a group. They're not looking at us individually. But how do we go about building this story? This happens with our next 2 points. The first of which is purpose. Every presentation, every speech, every delivery has to have one main purpose or one focused message. And that's important to keep in mind because even though we might be presenting different things as a group, we should keep reiterating that purpose. This helps us come across as cohesive. It might be obvious for us to assume that the audience knows that, yeah, we all are talking about one particular idea or presentation, of course, but the audience might not be on the same page. Sometimes when there's a lot going on, when we have many people, many things to put out there, we need to spoon feed our listeners a little more. That's why it's important for every group member to reiterate that purpose so that the audience knows that all the ideas and all the thoughts are leading to one particular message. And having this purpose combined with the next point, which is smooth transitions, helps us make a much more compelling story. Transitions. We made a whole video on this, which you can check out. The link is in the description. But in a nutshell, it's broken down into the CIIH method. C stands for conclusion, I stands for intrigue, I stands for introduction, and H stands for handover. An example of this would be this. To conclude, if we can increase our presence on these new age platforms, we'll have a much higher chance of increasing our sales. But how do we go about creating this presence? To answer that, we have our strategy head, Neil. Neil has been working in strategy for the past 3.5 years and comes with a lot of experience specifically in the digital domain. He's going to take you through what platforms we recommend for you and the strategy we need to deploy for each of them to get the best results. Neil, it's as simple as that. Making sure transitions are on point will help make the entire group seem so much more seamless. Point number 4 is Q&A. Q&A sections, very critical when it comes to group presentations. And this is where things tend to get messy because we don't know who should answer and everyone's looking at everybody. If we sometimes don't know the answer to something, what do we say then? This is where the moderator comes into play. Ideally, the moderator or the leader of that presentation should have knowledge about the substance of everyone's work. And to avoid any sort of confusion, the best thing that I've noticed after doing so many group presentations is that all the questions should be answered by this moderator. Now, some may argue saying that certain questions need to be answered by people who hold that area of expertise. And that might be true, but to avoid any sort of confusion, it's best that if the first answer comes from one person, and then the moderator can hand over that same question to the person who he or she feels has more knowledge in that domain. It could go something like this. Let's say I'm the moderator, and if I answer a question, if I know that somebody in my group would probably have more knowledge in this area, after I'm done answering, I'll look at them and be like, Neil, do you have anything to add to that? And if they do, they can simply take it off from there. And if they don't, they can simply respond with, no, I think you covered it all. This makes it so much simpler to make sure that there's no confusion or we are not left looking at each other wondering who's going to answer what. And finally, if we do not know the answer to something, we can simply say, that's a good question. Let me get back to you on that. And that's about it. If you have any more questions when it comes to things like presentations, public speaking, or communications, we have an entire website with in-depth articles and resources dedicated just for that. So go check out franticallyspeaking.com. And if you want to know how you can introduce yourself in a presentation, we have a video right here.